Brazil is hosting a regional summit after a 9-year break. It's bringing together 12 countries in Brasilia with the goal of promoting cooperation. Paulo Cabral has more from the capital.
This is the first time in 9 years that representatives of all 12 South American nations gathered at a regional summit. And out of the 12, only Peru didn't have a president in the meeting, with Dina Boulart instead sending a representative. The leaders met inside Itamaraty Palace, the headquarters of Brazil's Ministry of Foreign Affairs, for a whole day of discussions behind closed doors. Only the opening speech of the host, President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva, was broadcast publicly in full.
President Lula da Silva wants to reinvigorate the Union of South American Nations, UNASUR, but some countries are indicating reluctance. The bloc came to existence in 2008, when leftist governments dominated the region, and there are concerns it's still viewed as overly leftist and anti-US. In 2018, when the continent had swung to the right, UNASUR lost half its members, including Brazil, and most of its significance.
But despite the perceived resistance, the current political scenario in South America, which has again swung left, does seem an opportunity for new integration policies. But there are reports that South American leaders might be more willing to work toward more pragmatic cooperation, distance it from any political affiliations or ideologies to the left or the right. In his opening speech, President Lula pushed for concrete talks to be launched aiming at rebuilding the international body.
I think it's essential that we create a high-level group to be formed by personal representatives of each president to keep thinking about this based on what will be discussed here today. This group will have 120 days to present a roadmap for the integration of South America.
This political analyst says the Brazilian president needs to be mindful of ideological sensitivities if he wants his project to be successful.
I think the left-wing leaders, particularly Lula, must make it clear that it's not an ideological organization. That's an organization that aims at empowering South America in the global stage. No matter whether we are moving to the right, to the left, we have a commitment to helping each other in times of crisis like the ones we're living in.
It's as yet unclear what may come out of Tuesday's gathering in Brasilia, after leaders disperse to their home countries. Even if they agree on the need for more integration, many details on possible paths to get there must still be discussed. Paulo Cabral, CGTN, Brasilia.
As we mentioned, with Malaysia, more countries are promoting the trend of de-dollarization. Argentina, one of them. Joel Richards has this from Buenos Aires.
It has become known as the yuan advantage. By using yuan instead of dollars to pay for imports from China, Argentine companies like this paper mill outside Buenos Aires receive quicker approval for those imports than they would using dollars.
Roughly 25% of our imports come from China, so we are talking about 25% of SMEs and industries that buy supplies from that market, and by using the yuan, they will benefit.
Argentina began using yuan to pay for Chinese imports in April.
As a bank, we are seeing that there is a more sustained level of operations, payments, and imports in yuan. Before, it was sporadic. Now, it is more sustained.
The announcement to use yuan was an urgent measure to stem the outflow of US dollars.
A historic drought has decimated exports for Latin America's third largest economy, depleting the country's foreign currency reserves.
Argentina's economy is suffering the impact of that shortfall, and the country is looking at further options to reduce its dollar dependence. Rather than replace the peso or the real, South America's two largest economies are discussing the creation of a currency union, like the Eurozone, to conduct bilateral trade. They've proposed a common currency, tentatively named the Sur, or the South in English. Analyst Andres Serbin says this proposal is part of a global trend. Many other countries are already paying for Chinese imports with yuan, including Russia, Iran, Thailand and Bangladesh.
There's a whole process in which countries first tend to reduce their amount of dollars in reserves and to substitute the dollar for national currencies in commercial exchanges. There is talk of an erosion of the dollar and not necessarily a disappearance of the dollar, because the US economy, despite all its problems, continues to be decisive in the world economy.
Like Argentina, Brazil also pays for Chinese imports with yuan, and President Lula has suggested BRICS nations develop their own currency, as South American nations are now considering. Joel Richards for CGTN in Buenos Aires.
For more on the summit, Latin America's economy, Otaviano Canuto, Senior Fellow for the Policy Center for New South. He's also the former VP of the World Bank. Good to see you again.
Good to see you as always, Phil.
So, as you just heard, we're talking again about possibly a regional currency, and this is not the first time this has been brought up. So I'm glad that they finally, I guess the 12 countries all met. I'm not sure this was part of the conversation, but it certainly is behind the scenes. Do you think this is a good idea?
Frankly, Phil, there's sometimes a misunderstanding. I understand that what Lula has proposed is an emulation of what China has made with Brazil and with Argentina. That is to say, some sort of trade being paid in local currencies, with the settlements being done occasionally, but that being a way to diminish the need to have dollars, the conversion of exports and imports on dollars. So that's a way to economize the use of foreign reserves. And I understand that what Lula has been proposing is some sort of a similar mechanism among the countries of South America. So it's not the substitution of local currencies with a new common one, as it was the case in Europe. This is quite important to stress on, because not long ago, there was an interview made by the Financial Times to an Argentinian Minister of Finance that sent wrong message. So, you know, and in the past, there were mechanisms in South America established by the Latin American Integration Institution that played that role. But
Otaviano, one of the criticisms in the past, and I'll just take Argentina as an example, right? They borrow dollars, they have to pay back in dollars. That gives them very little wiggle room, very little leeway, and that's why some places are like, look, if you trade in, say, RMB or a regional block currency, you don't have to be as reliant upon the dollars. That would diversify, I guess, your reserve base in particular, so that you would not be, I guess, held to a situation where you'd have to repay dollars that, if you have a situation where the currency is getting devalued, you'd at least protect your sort of federal coffers. That was always one of the major arguments. Does that still fit in today's world?
See, this is the open question. Let's go back to the agreement between Brazil and China. Over the last few years, at least, Brazil has had trade surpluses with China. So as soon as the mechanism is in place and we no longer have the recourse to dollar in the trade between Brazil and China, most likely, occasionally, once in a time, when there is some settlement, this will lead to the accumulation of Brazilian reserves in renminbi, in yuans, okay? Assuming that, of course, Brazil has a trade surplus. What matters in the case is that neither of the two parts have to resort to dollars to exchange every time there is an export or import. In the case of South America, this is what is not clear yet. What would be the currency? What would be the means of occasionally meeting the bills and paying the balance? This is something that is not clear yet.
And look, in the research we're doing on this, it's not clear to me what ultimately the longer term benefits are other than perhaps a political victory that could be said by, say, places like China, right? To say, look, you've got reserves in our currency, it's great, I mean, that's fantastic, but you have to think about what's the benefit to some of these regional economies. Let's talk about Latin America. We're now well past the COVID part of it. Things are, for the most part, back to normal, but there are some serious challenges that a lot of these places face, including one that we also have to deal with, which is inflation. How are they managing it, and how are they getting back, sort of, on things getting back to normal?
Right. Tackling inflation is basically each country on their own. The policies that are implemented on both fiscal and monetary fronts, in exchange rates in some case, that have to tackle on different ways. The situations are completely different in countries like Argentina and Brazil as well. So this initiative, I don't think it is geared at tackling the issue of inflation. On the other hand, it's important to call attention how there is a cooperative agenda in concrete terms in areas such as infrastructure, health, the fight against organized crime, also on many other of the items of the agenda that were touched today, where the countries could do a good thing for all themselves if they find ways to cooperate. So I guess in my times when I was a vice president at the Inter-American Development Bank, and that was long ago, in 2007, 2008, 2009, I was, as a vice president, the manager of an initiative at the time, the Initiative for the Integration of Regional Infrastructure in South America. The benefits, the potential benefits of which were clear to everyone. Unfortunately, the program was phased out, and UNASUR was supposed to take it over, but then things got awry. The point is that any initiative to call for a higher regulatory convergence, to call for less trade barriers, and so on, this has would be of benefit for all the countries in the region. And I understand that clumsily or not, what Lula did was to call attention to the fact, look, regardless of our difference in terms of political approaches, in terms of ideology or whatever, there is a concrete agenda that can be built.
Well, look, Otaviano, what's clear is that they're talking, they're back together, at least 12 of them are, and they're tackling some of the same problems, I guess, even though the situations are different, or the solutions are different, but at least there is, as you say, cooperation on tackling this stuff. I appreciate it. We're out of time. Thank you very much.